and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Ann Northrup.
And I'm Chris Cooper, in for Andy Hum, who is fine and home recovering from his surgery.
His hernia surgery. He's been open about it. We can be too. Yeah, he came home from the hospital the same day. He's in good shape, a little groggy, but he is planning to be back next week. We'll see if he's on his feet by then, but thank you all for your kind comments and good wishes for Andy. He wants us to thank you, and he's fine. We also want to note before we start that, of course, next week is the election day, and we really urge you to get out and vote. There are many important races for U.S. Senate, congressional races, and
local races. Yes,
exactly. So please vote. You can make a difference. And now this week's headlines.
Well, first of all, there's been a possible big breakthrough in treatment for AIDS, or to prevent AIDS and the spread of HIV with pre-exposure prophylaxis, or PrEP. A new regimen that may make a big difference. We'll tell you about it.
And may be a lot easier to accomplish, so we'll start with that tonight. And Pope Francis, I'm sorry Andy isn't here for this, shows his true colors this week. He made a speech to a big group about marriage and relationships, and it was not pretty.
Ex-presidents behaving badly. We have Bill Clinton speaking at the HRC annual dinner, and then some comments from Jimmy Carter, where he backtracks a little bit in his support for same-sex marriage.
Yeah, very strange. And of course, this is Halloween week, so people are looking at scary things. But we have some really scary stories about attacks on gay men by guys who they were hooking up with in online meeting places. And not good news, and more warnings to you about being careful about that.
Apple CEO Tim Cook goes home to Alabama and brings some truth on gay and lesbian equality with him.
Really good stuff. And another good decision on employment. The Army is found to have discriminated against a transgender civilian doing missile research for them.
And Anne will tell you about two separate cases of the courts in Uganda actually deciding in favor of gay men and dismissing charges against them.
And we'll have reviews from Andy of a couple of shows he saw this week, The Real Thing and The Last Ship. But we start, as we don't often do, with AIDS news, because there was a huge potential breakthrough announced this week in a study out of France. Now, we have told you and discussed for a long time whether or not it's a good idea to take Truvada as a daily pill to prevent HIV infection.
This is for those who are not already infected.
Correct. Thank you for that note. Or an alternative method has been what's called PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis. If you have unprotected sex, or sex where a condom breaks or something, you rush off to the drugstore or a hospital and get an emergency supply of Truvada and take it for a few days to prevent infection. But this study looked at a different version of this, and the results so far, they're not final, but so far, are so exciting that they have changed the trial and put everyone who was on a placebo into the drug part of the trial because of what they have found out. And here's what they are doing in this trial.
Well, what's different is that they've gone from a daily dose of Truvada to only taking Truvada, and I'm a little ambiguous on this. The reports, I read two things, 12 hours or 2 hours?
2 to 24 hours is the chart I saw.
2 to 24 hours before you know you're going to have unprotected sex, you take the Truvada.
Before you have sex, not before you know you're going to have sex. before you have
Before you have sex.
2 to 24 hours beforehand, you take 2 Truvada pills.
And then you also take it afterwards for, I believe it's 2 days?
Yes, the next day and the day after you take 1 pill. And if you're having sex, you know, several days in a row, then you just keep taking it until 2 days after your last unprotected intercourse. And what they did was they studied 400 men who have sex with men. This was a study of gay men having sex in France, and half of them were in a part of the study where they were following this regimen, and the other half, I'm sorry to say, were on placebo. We try not to do that in these kinds of cases, because what happened is some got infected and some didn't. And the difference was so dramatic between the 2 arms of the trial that they took everyone who was on placebo and said, we're putting you on the regimen that we have set up of this 2 pills just before sex and then 1 pill a day for 2 days afterwards, because it works so much better.
The reason why this is such a big deal is because if you're taking Truvada daily, it potentially, because all drugs have side effects, could, you know, do some harm to your body, or it's a potentially toxic regimen. Any drug taken over the long term, there's a potential for long-term side effects. This eliminates the need to take the pill every single day for your whole life. You can just take it when you're going to have sex. And then the other big advantage is cost, because it's much less expensive to take the pill when you need it as opposed to just having to take it every single day.
And there have been questions about adherence for people who were supposed to be taking it every day. Were they actually taking it every day? Was it working if they only took it 5 days a week or 3 days a week or whatever, and that was up in the air. And if you rely on taking it after unprotected sex, then you're worried about, where am I going to find it? Can I get it fast enough? Can I take it fast enough? This solves all those problems by saying have a supply on hand if you are going to be sexually active, and then you can do it very deliberately in this way with some assurance. Now, we do not have final results of the study. We don't know what percentage of people were protected. We only know that it was a whole lot better doing it this way than not doing it at all, because we don't have the details of the study yet. And the other thing to really note is that this is for people who are not HIV infected. Because if you are HIV infected already, then taking Truvada alone, not in combination with other drugs, can promote resistance to the drug, can have other possible side effects. So this is for people who are not infected. On the other hand, if you are infected and you're going to be having unprotected sex or potentially unprotected sex with partners who are not infected, you might want to keep a supply on hand to give to your sex partners.
So a lot of people are very excited about this. Again, preliminary results, but it's promising, and we'll have to see how the final results turn out.
If you want more information about this, you can try Googling French study, Truvada, HIV prevention, or ask your doctor. But it is a tremendously, potentially exciting breakthrough. Now, I want to do other AIDS news right now because some of this is related. There was a story this week of a woman who went into West Hollywood bars at happy hour to do Q&As with young men.
Yeah, the contrast is that she is a baby boomer who lived through the AIDS crisis, and she's now going into a West Hollywood bar to find out, sort of undercover, to find out what millennials think about AIDS and PrEP and all of this.
And these were these were at Ivy League events in West Hollywood bars. This was so, you know, a supposedly educated crowd. Here's what she found from talking to these guys. Here was their opinion. Condoms are over. We don't use condoms. They break. And if you use a condom, it indicates you're infected. what is this, 40 years ago?
And also they say it suggests that you're green behind the ears, that you just got off the boat from Iowa, which, by the way, is landlocked.
We only have a 2% chance of getting HIV. This is all hysteria. I don't know anyone with HIV. Well, this is such classic garbage. The idea that you don't know anyone with HIV is only because the drugs have been working for the last 20 years, and almost 20 years. So you're not seeing people horribly sick in the streets as we did in the 80s and 90s before the drugs came along.
And also, in light of the story we just told you about, one of the other disturbing things is that most of them didn't know, about 2/3 of them didn't know what PrEP was.
Yeah.
And the third that did considered it overkill.
Unnecessary overkill. Also, they think any fear of HIV, any of this talk about watch out for HIV, is simply being perpetuated by people working in the AIDS industry who are afraid of losing their jobs. Well, frankly, everyone I know working in the AIDS industry would love to lose their jobs because they would love this epidemic to be over.
Well, it's not, and that is unfortunately what this woman found in speaking to, outside of this West Hollywood context, in speaking to a psychotherapist friend of hers. She said that people were coming in asking about PrEP, young people, and that she was seeing more and more people seroconverting, young people seroconverting, which of course is the statistics we're seeing.
Absolutely.
Now, none of this addresses what's necessarily happening in minority communities. You know, I imagine if you're talking to Ivy League millennials in West Hollywood, you're talking to a largely, white crowd.
That would be my guess.
But it does give you a little insight into what's going on, and especially, in light of, again, these PrEP results.
Well, maybe they should all go look at the AIDS monument that's going to be erected by West Hollywood. That might, no, they'll just see it as the past if they look at that.
Well, they said that for this group, it's sort of like Happy Days to them, or Greece, or the 50s, the AIDS era. It's something that's so removed from their experience that it's completely conceptualized.
Happy Days, that was a good little reference. Also, the Elton John AIDS Foundation announced it is partnering with the U.S. State Department to fund a program called Health for Men for more HIV services for gay men and transgender people in Africa, starting in South Africa. And the Elton John AIDS Foundation is giving $300,000 to HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, to publicize issues of HIV prevention. I don't think of HRC when I think of HIV information, but who knows?
Well, in San Francisco, they're doing something that might be helpful if the millennials there are anything like the millennials in West Hollywood. By a 10-to-1 vote, their Board of Supervisors voted to allocate over $300,000 to the city's general fund to educate San Franciscans about HIV prevention through Truvada and PrEP. So this may help increase usage of that.
Never enough information, but getting people to pay attention is a whole other thing. It is interesting to me, on a side note, how much AIDS and our experience in the epidemic is now being talked about in relation to the Ebola outbreak. And more than 100 AIDS activists and doctors and professionals got together to yell at New York Governor Cuomo and New Jersey Governor Christie, but mostly Cuomo, because a lot of these people are on Cuomo's AIDS task force. But they were yelling at him for this harsh 21-day strict quarantine of all health workers who had been in Africa and come back. They say this will discourage the people from the U.S. going to Africa, will create hysteria, panic, and stigma. And God knows that the HIV epidemic is all about stigma. And most of that was because of its association with homosexuality. But in many ways, we're creating this stigma around Ebola, and kids are being yelled at in school if they are African or appear to be African. They're being yelled at, Ebola, Ebola. And it's going to drive people away from treatment. It's going to drive them into hiding. It's already happening in Africa, where people don't want to come forward and they're concealing family members with Ebola, and that's not helping end the epidemic. And and the AIDS activists point out that all this hysteria around Ebola is very much like what happened when Ryan White and others were kept out of school because of fear of him having HIV and transmitting it. And people are just going too far with this hysteria.
The big problem with the unnecessary quarantine is that when you said it discourages people going to Africa, we're not talking about tourism, we're talking about doctors and healthcare workers going to Africa to help contain the virus. And over and over and over, people are saying that the only way you're really going to get a handle on tamping down Ebola is by stopping it in West Africa, because in our world today, with everyone going everywhere, the only way to contain it is by knocking it down there. It's going to get out otherwise, no matter what you do. So if we discourage healthcare workers from helping in Africa, it just means it's going to come back to haunt us here. And that's the big problem with the mandatory quarantine when it's not needed.
Right. So I got one more health story. Have you got any other?
Nope.
Okay.
Oh, well, I have one about prostate cancer.
Yes, that's it.
Yes.
The news this week that men who have slept with more than 20 women have a lower risk of prostate cancer, but men who have slept with more than 20 men have a higher risk of prostate cancer.
Very curious.
Yeah, they have no explanation for this. Well, they have some theories that are so silly.
And it was
not
also
even gonna repeat
based
them.
on interviews, that kind of study.
Yeah.
So.
All right, on to marriage.
All right.
Well, so many of you have complained about our getting too detailed about district courts and levels of appeal and all of that we thought we'd annoy you further by showing you the map of the district courts, the federal system in the United States, to try to explain this to you. All right, so I hope you can see this. In the upper right corner in New England, you see the 1st District in orange. It's legal everywhere there, but now Puerto Rico, which happens for no good reason to be in the 1st District, has a decision against same-sex marriage. So we may end up with more court action in the 1st District. 2nd District's fine, 3rd District's fine. The 4th is decided. The 11th down there, Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, the case is moving up, and that may be a place where we get a decision sometime in the foreseeable future. The 5th is one of the ones I'm really worried about. They've just moved up the arguments, though. They've scheduled arguments on a Texas case and a Louisiana case in January. So they're moving ahead in the 5th Circuit. Were all decided pretty much in the 10th and the 9th and the 7th. But in the 5th, which was the center, middle, northern, Midwest, that is still up in the air. And the 6th in Ohio, Tennessee, Michigan, and Kentucky, we're waiting for a decision there. So
and which
if
one?
the map were still up there, you could get a sense, thank you. Look at 9, 10, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. Most of the country, 2/3 of the country now, same-sex marriage is legal, but we're looking in the middle there at 6, 8, 5, and 11, still awaiting decisions.
And 5, I think, is the one where it's considered most likely that if we're going to get a ruling against us at the appellate level, it's going to be from the 5th?
Yes, although I'm not feeling very good about 8 at the moment either. I think we could lose in 8 and Minnesota should not be in there. I don't know. That's a bad map to have included that. But the other state, or Iowa. That's a wrong map.
What a loss in one of these Court of Appeals at that level means is that the ball gets thrown into the Supreme Court's lap.
Yeah.
And then they really do have to decide if there is a national right to same-sex marriage.
So I was on a conference call that the ACLU ran last week about all these attempts by the right wing to assert religious freedom in resisting these marriage references. Some of it out of this Idaho case with the Hobby Lobby, not the Hobby Lobby, the hitching post. The Coeur d'Alene powers that be have now agreed that the hitching post has sufficiently redefined itself as religious that it will not be subject to non-discrimination laws. They can go ahead and do their religious marriages and not have to do same-sex marriages if they don't want to. So again, this is the religious right fomenting panic by saying the hitching post was going to face all sorts of fines and horrors. No, all you have to do is be an actual religious entity, and then you can do whatever you want in this. It's if you're conducting yourselves as a for-profit business that you have to follow non-discrimination laws.
Well, in fact, one of Gay USA's viewers, Scott, wrote in to say that the Philadelphia Inquirer ran an opinion piece on exactly that issue, where they talked about religious freedom being stripped away, and it was mirrored in Philly.com on their website. So if you're in the Philadelphia area, you might want to take the opportunity to send comments, letters, remarks in response to that to say, this is all ginned up by the religious right, and it's not a real issue.
I asked on this call about the Hobby Lobby decision, where the Supreme Court did allow a private business that asserted religious morals, even though they're a private for-profit business, but because they're family-owned and the family says we're very religious, they were allowed to make some decisions based on their religious values.
But that was not in conflict with anti-discrimination statutes on the books. Because, well, I would argue it was, but there is something called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that is a national law that was an attempt to prop up these religious organizations. And the Supreme Court decided that because this was family-owned and a religiously identified family that had consistently asserted religious values, they could have the power to make birth control decisions for their employees. Now, I think it's a lousy decision. I think the law should be unconstitutional if it allows that kind of stuff, but that was the basis on which they did it. So I asked on the ACLU call about this, and they said that's a national law. It doesn't apply to these marriage cases locally, and although some states are trying to pass these Religious Freedom Restoration Acts, Mississippi, as we know, passed a watered-down version. Arizona rejected theirs, or the governor vetoed it. I've lost track. And other states have rejected them. But the right wing will be attempting to get more of these passed to bolster people's arguments against having to do same-sex marriages or provide services or whatever. But they were fairly confident that it was okay. But they also agreed that in states or localities where there are no non-discrimination laws, we're not protected. Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, strangely enough, let me not slur Coeur d'Alene, has a non-discrimination law. So that's why the Hitching Post did have to change its definition to a religious organization. But if you are a business, a for-profit business, in a location that has non-discrimination laws, you must serve everyone equally. But if you're in a location that doesn't have a non-discrimination law, then you can discriminate. So another reason for all of you to go out and make sure that your state, your town, your city, whatever, has a non-discrimination law that includes sexual orientation and gender identity for public accommodation. Unfortunately, we've reached the point where the marriage laws in many states have run ahead of the non-discrimination laws because of these court rulings. And it's actually, I suspect, going to make it harder to get non-discrimination laws passed in some of them, because people will say, oh, no, this is going to lead to adding sexual orientation will mean that I can't say no based on my religion to baking a cake.
That will certainly be an argument that is made, although that's a refreshing change from the bathroom arguments that they've mostly been making against these bills. But it's also a reason we need a national non-discrimination law for sexual orientation and gender identity that is more than just employment.
But unfortunately, that's many years away.
Maybe. You know, we didn't think we would get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We didn't think we'd get rid of DOMA. True. We didn't think we'd pass all these marriage laws or win these court cases. When people say you can't do this, I say you got to start somewhere, and you never know, because we have had all these successes.
The difference is, though, that a lot of these successes have been on the state level, and you're talking about passing a national law. There is nothing more locked in place and frozen than our federal government.
Go vote. Get rid of these jerks.
There you go.
And strangely enough, in the run-up to the election, there are some Republican representatives who are saying they want ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, attached to defense authorization bill in the lame duck session after the election. I think they're just trying to win some left-wing votes. I don't think it's a real possibility, but I also think we have to remain vigilant against that, because ENDA, as they want it, it includes a huge religious exemption that we do not want codified into law. All right, other marriage news. There's some amusing things. There's a Kansas couple, a straight couple, that has filed to join a suit
Paul
against
and
marriage.
Sandy Unruh? I'm not sure how you say their name.
It could be. The meaning of marriage will be so fundamentally and profoundly changed that we will experience a taking of our property rights in marriage without due process of law.
In other words, they're saying marriage is something they own, and their property will be stolen if gay people can now get married. This was tossed out by the judge summarily, and he said, if you want to, you can file an amicus brief, but you can't join as a plaintiff, not as a plaintiff, but as a defendant in the case. So they have now come back, they're back again, they've filed an amicus brief, relying largely on Bible thumping, you know,
yes.
The Lord meant
procreation.
Yeah, blah,
well,
blah.
it's about value. It's about, there's value in marriage, and marriage will be devalued if you let these creepy same-sex couples join in. And it always takes me back to a story about Russia many years ago, which was that when women started becoming doctors in Russia, the medical profession became devalued because women were now a large percentage of the doctors.
Wow.
And I understand them making that argument, that they think they're losing something if they are forced to have us included in their right of marriage.
Well, isn't that sort of proof right there of the animus we need to show?
Absolutely. Absolutely, positively.
Well, this is in Kansas. Also in Kansas, the infamous Topeka, quote-unquote, church, the Westboro Baptist Church, is also trying to get in the act and join the Kansas marriage case, challenge the Kansas marriage ban.
I think they
is
have
doomed. But
they have a unique argument. They say that to legalize same-sex marriage will bring God's wrath down on Kansas, and what do I have there? And will destroy the state. Now, I would think that would give a court pause to be told that if they legalize same-sex marriage, they are bringing God's wrath down upon the state.
beware.
And so far, they haven't won that argument, but we'll see. And I'm shocked to see that Jimmy Carter, who has in the past supported same-sex marriage, been very pro-gay, been one of our greatest supporters, gave an interview where he said he thinks, oh, it's just fine to have states decide individually whether to legalize same-sex marriage. And, you know, if Texas doesn't want same-sex marriage, that's okay. They should be able to decide that. No, no, Jimmy.
Well, you know, simple transposition. What if it was interracial marriage? Would states be able to say, oh, no, we don't want it? And would Jimmy Carter then be okay with, oh, okay, Texas doesn't want interracial marriage, so those people in that state can make that decision? No, your fundamental rights are not subjected to majority rule.
Well, he's confused, and I think he said in the same interview that, you know, I'm a Baptist and my church gets to decide what we do, and I think he is just simply...
He's conflating the two issues,
yes,
which are
exactly.
two totally separate things.
They are. So it's, Jimmy, I'm sure someone will disabuse you of that notion. In North Carolina, a legislative leader there says he's going to introduce a bill to allow public officials to refuse to perform same-sex weddings if they have personal religious feelings against it. He's going to get nowhere with that. That is clearly illegal for a public official to discriminate like that, but he's barking up that tree. And interesting news, in the Fifth Circuit cases in Louisiana and Texas, the Cato Institute, which is thought of as more conservative, but is self-defined as a libertarian think tank, has filed a brief for same-sex marriage. In the Louisiana, specifically, case, we had the bad ruling from the federal judge in that case, and that's what's now being appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Cato Institute makes the case that we think should be logical to all conservatives and libertarians, which is that this is equal protection of the laws, and that should be easily understood.
Are you ready to shift to the religious aspect of marriage?
Go right ahead.
All right. Well, Pope Francis, who many people have pinned their hopes on for bringing a fresh air into the Catholic Church.
So true. And yet our standard bearer, Mr. Hum, has seen through that from the beginning.
He apparently has retrenched, perhaps after the synod or their big meeting where they were supposed to discuss family issues, and basically the cardinals put the smackdown on any language that would have been more welcoming to same-sex couples. And now subsequent to that, Pope Francis himself has said in an interview with a group called the Schoenstatt Movement, which is all about the Virgin Mary, that he thinks marriages have been bastardized. He explains that the family is being hit, the family is being struck, and the family is being bastardized by various things, including same-sex marriage and people living together. This unfortunately, I think, is going to put the kibosh on a lot of people's hopes for him to bring change, but we'll see. I mean, the big thing about this to me is that it's always talk. You know, they say better things, they say nicer things, they say not so great things. No one cares what you say. We care what you do. And what they're doing is opposing our rights across the world and in state after state. Our right to, even our right just for non-discrimination, the Catholic Church still opposes. And now they also oppose our right to marriage equality. So, you know, what they say is of very little import, to me anyway. What they do is far more important.
We love you, we love you. How dare you call us homophobic? I can't imagine why you think we hate you. We love you, love you, love you. You can come to our church. You just can't do any of the things that are natural to you. He basically blasted, as you said, same-sex marriage, living together, any kind of secular marriage or relationship. Marriage must be with God. You marry not only your partner, your opposite-sex partner, but you marry God, too. We're not interested.
Yeah, that's fine for your religious view, but there's also a thing called civil marriage, and he doesn't like that, but too bad. All
right, the Utah Supreme Court has lifted its stay on adoptions by same-sex couples. The Florida State Appeals Court will hear marriage cases. The Attorney General, Pam Bondi of Florida, who's quite a piece of work, wanted to go directly to the Florida Supreme Court. The appeals court said, nope, you have to go through us first. And marriage licenses have now been issued in every Arizona county since their ban was lifted, so that's a good thing. David Gushee, who is a leading evangelical ethicist at Mercer College, which is a Baptist college in Georgia, has published a new book called Changing Our Mind, a call from America's leading evangelical ethics scholar for full acceptance of LGBT Christians in the church. And he affirms same-sex relationships.
Idaho has now spent $80,000 fighting the lifting of the ban of same-sex marriage there.
Yeah, follow the money.
Taxpayer money out the window.
The National Organization for Marriage is spending $100,000 in North Carolina during this election season to defeat Kay Hagan, including running anti-same-sex marriage TV ads. Now, what's interesting, and I'm not sure how they're getting away with this, is they say in their form they have to fill out for the TV station to run the ads, they say, none of this supports or opposes a candidate. This is all issue-based. And then they run this ad that says, elect Tom Tillis, defeat Kay Hagan.
What I find more interesting is, why is NOM spending money on this? It really has no direct impact on marriage laws in North Carolina,
which have already become open to same-sex marriage.
Exactly.
Well, that's an interesting question. Frank Schaefer, the Methodist minister who performed the marriage for his gay son and then was defrocked, has been refrocked by the Methodist Judicial Council. It always amuses me that these churches have legal entities or their own legal entities.
And the case to watch, I think, of all the marriage cases is the Mississippi case, which is on a fast track now. It's also being led by the Windsor attorney, Verda Kaplan, open lesbian, and it's going before an Obama appointee judge, an African-American judge named Carlton Reeves.
And he has fast-tracked it.
So that's the case to watch, and they're having motions and a hearing on November 12th.
And that's also in the Fifth Circuit, along with Texas and Louisiana, so it's quite a mix of churning cases in the Fifth Circuit. But the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has already scheduled appeals for Texas and Louisiana, so Mississippi may or may not catch up to that schedule. Ted Olson, the Prop 8 lawyer, Republican, says that with the Supreme Court's inactions on the marriage cases to allow same-sex marriage to go forward in so many states, they have reached the point of no return. He can't imagine them denying marriage rights in subsequent cases. He still wants a national decision. I still think there is a 1% chance that if we got a bad decision in a circuit, the Supreme Court would let that stand too. That's my concern. That they would fulfill a states' rights kind of routine. Not highly likely, but just something to watch out for, as I am also watching out for the heinous Employment Non-Discrimination Act being slipped in on us. Creighton University, which is a Catholic Jesuit university in Omaha, is offering benefits to the same-sex spouses of its employees. Over the objections of the local archbishop. And even though same-sex marriage is not yet legal in Nebraska. And in the height of irony, New York Court of Appeals Justice Robert Smith, who turned down same-sex marriage in this state some years ago and said the legislature had to approve it, which they eventually did, and who Andy and I had the pleasure of yelling at a small panel discussion he did at a school. Robert Smith has okayed marriage between a man who is the half-brother of the mother of his bride. On the grounds that the legislature says it's okay for first cousins to marry in this state. So the small chance of some genetic problem, he's okay with that. Okay, Robert. Are we ready to circle back to more religious news? Go right ahead. All right. Well, the Southern Baptists have been meeting to sort of talk about ethics and religious liberty. That's never a good thing for us when it's the Southern Baptists. But something really interesting came out of it in that, I mean, they're still against same-sex marriage, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. But their leader, a guy named Russell Moore, denounced reparative therapy. He said it's severely counterproductive, and he said we Christians have been misguided in thinking that sexual orientation can change. It can't change, that the only thing you can do is live biblically. In other words, be celibate for your whole life. So this is, believe it or not, this is a modicum of progress, and certainly gives us more ammunition against those who are still promoting reparative therapy. Yeah, I think probably the same debate about it is going on about Pope Francis and the Catholic Church, but this guy also did say that LGBT people have been mistreated by the Southern Baptists and that they ought to work on stopping bullying of LGBT people, and he says they should not be kicked out of the home, that you should love your gay children. And help homeless LGBT youth, all good things. And in response to his dogging of reparative therapy, Brian Fisher of the so-called American Family Association is livid. Yes. Well, and Brian Fisher he's out on another planet, but there is a potentially disturbing thing going on in Houston this weekend. We've told you about this whole thing with the non-discrimination law in Houston, and they passed the law, and then the right wing wanted to challenge it and get it on the ballot, and they started gathering petition signatures, but the city told them they didn't have enough signatures, so then the right wing sued to say, oh, yes, we did. You inappropriately discounted our signatures. And the city said, no, we didn't, and that's in court, and the city issued subpoenas for some information about how they had conducted their petition gathering, and the right wing said, oh, you're subpoenaing ministers and sermons and everything, and you can't do that, and you're out to destroy religion. Add to this
an open lesbian mayor in the
Yes.
city of Houston in Anise Parker.
Yes.
So this just inflames the whole situation. Well, unfortunately, I mean, it doesn't really reflect on her, but it's going to be seen as a huge victory for the right wing. She's backtracked and she said, no, we're going to withdraw all the subpoenas because it's just not good for the city of Houston. She didn't admit there was anything wrong with them because there wasn't. They weren't asking for sermons, but she is withdrawing the subpoenas just in the name of peace in Houston, basically.
And the right wing is going to not let up on this until they have soaked every possible ounce of use out of this. So they're holding this big rally this weekend called I Stand Sunday. They're bringing in Tony Perkins, they're bringing in Mike Huckabee, they're bringing in every right-wing religious leader they can. And we wanted to show you, since it's Halloween weekend, the scary promo they are doing for this, which will remind you of some previous scary right-wing promos. I Stand Sunday.
Have you felt it? Dark forces marching across our country, an agenda trampling upon our first freedoms, endangering our First Amendment rights, the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom to petition our own government. Talk about biblical standards publicly in this new era of so-called tolerance? You could be bullied, fined, subpoenaed, fired from your job, or worse. Recently, the speeches and communications of 5 pastors in Texas were subpoenaed by Houston's openly gay mayor and her attorneys. The subpoenas were the mayor's response to citizens collecting over 50,000 signatures in 30 days to put her special homosexual rights measure on the ballot. This bulldozing of the First Amendment freedoms of pastors in Houston is unprecedented. Is it a preview of what's coming to your community? It doesn't have to be, if America returns to God and His truth. Scripture tells us to put on the full armor of God so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. We are inviting you to join with Christians across the country in support of the pastors in Texas and for religious freedom across our nation. Join us Sunday night, November 2nd, 2014 for I Stand Sunday. You'll hear from the 5 Houston pastors as well as Governor Mike Huckabee, Duck Dynasty's Phil and Al Robertson, Dr. Ed Young, Southern Baptist Convention President Dr. Ronnie Floyd, host Tony Perkins, and other Christian leaders. The I Stand Sunday simulcast event is a chance to stand with these pastors and stand against the radical agenda sweeping our nation. Sign up now at istandsunday.com.
They're not giving up.
That's depressing.
It is depressing. And also, a small footnote, lesbian Houston Mayor Anise Parker's daughter went for a driver's license, and then there was some question about whether she was sent away because she had 2 moms, and the paperwork didn't conform to their whatever. She eventually got her license, but just
after a lot
another
of back
little,
and forth getting the paperwork around.
Better religious news at Notre Dame University this weekend. They're having a conference called Gays in Christ, Dimensions of Fidelity, how the Catholic Church should come to its senses about dealing with LGBT people. Well, they are giving benefits to same-sex spouses at Notre
Creighton
Dame.
University.
At Notre Dame.
Oh, at Notre Dame?
Yes,
Wow.
exactly.
Shocking.
All right.
Shall we move on to the crime news?
Sure.
All right.
Sad news, just a litany of cases. Canarsie, New York. Samuel Joseph, 27 years old. This is intimate partner violence. Slashed his partner, Daryl Burns, 38 years old, to death in a fight. That is violence, of course, within a relationship.
Then there's been a rash of hookup crime violence, as they call it. That's violence based on meeting someone for casual sex you haven't met before via an app or the web or Craigslist or whatever. And there was, for example, one on Manhattan's Upper West Side, happened on Saturday. And according to media reports, the survivor, 30, met a man online through Badoo.com, invited the man to his apartment. When the survivor answered the door, there were 3 men there, one of whom pulled a gun and robbed him of all his electronics gear.
In Norristown, Pennsylvania, Manuel Hakimian answered a Craigslist ad, and the guy who showed up for that killed him and robbed him. And that's what happened to him. In London, a guy who was attempting to hook up on Grindr was attacked and robbed by the guy who he thought he was hooking up with. If you are going to hook up on these apps, meet someone in a public place. Don't just invite them to your apartment. It is not necessarily safe.
And as Andy always says, when you're in that public place, even if you don't know the bartender, introduce the guy to the bartender, or just make sure the bartender sees who it is and has some sort of, visual identification of who you're going home with.
In Brooklyn, a lesbian couple was harassed and punched by an attacker outside a bar. They ended up in the hospital. He was, calling them names and went after them. Big guy, hasn't been caught yet.
And then exploding all over the internet is a hate crime at a Dallas-Fort Worth airport, where an extremely drunk redneck was yelling at a guy saying, "Oh, you're a faggot, I'm going to stop you people," and then jumps the guy right there on camera. He got wrestled to the ground by the cops and hauled away, and he faces a $1,000 fine, though no jail time.
Yeah. In a different case, in Cleveland, a Catholic priest has been arrested for soliciting sex in the park. He was in his car. He offered an undercover cop $50 to watch him masturbate. But the headline in the local paper in Cleveland was that he'd been arrested while being HIV positive. While being HIV positive. He's sitting in the truck. First of all, they revealed his HIV status. Second of all, he wasn't doing anything that bore any possibility of HIV transmission. And third, why are they arresting people for having sex anyway?
Well, and it's a really confusing story or disturbing story, because they did say that he was being charged for soliciting sex while HIV positive. And I don't know if that's a local statute or something there that,
well,
that I don't know about.
Yes, we talk about this endlessly, the criminalization of having sex while having HIV. It's just disgusting and horrible. In Texas, Lambda Legal is suing the Department of Criminal Justice, who put a transgender prisoner, a female transgender prisoner, in with men for years, and she's been slashed with a razor 8 times. She's been raped. She was a teenager when she got arrested. She was sentenced to 20 years in prison for kidnapping because she was in a car when her boyfriend took the car for a test drive from a dealer and wanted to keep joyriding a little and keep the salesman in the car. 20 years for kidnapping, and she has been nothing but raped, slashed with a razor, and abused in prison. And the authorities will do nothing to take care of her, transfer her to a women's prison, or any kind of protective situation. It's unbelievable. So Lambda is suing, thank heavens.
And flip side of that, in some respects, in California, there's a lawsuit by some transgendered inmates who say that by being isolated in a separate prison, they do not have access to the same facilities and the same courses,
rehabilitation,
that other inmates have. And so they're suing to make sure that, okay, if you're going to isolate us for our safety, that's fine, but you've got to give us all the same access to possible advantages.
And I'm happy to see that the U.S. Office of Special Counsel, which has a checkered history, has found that the Army discriminated against a transgender woman who was a civilian employee of the Army. She's a software engineer working in missile research in Alabama. They called her by the wrong name, the wrong pronouns. They put bathroom restrictions on her. Well, they have now been convicted, in essence, of sex discrimination, which is the way that transgender people are winning these cases now. And the facility has been ordered to do sensitivity training. And as long as we're in Alabama, I have to really compliment Tim Cook, the gay CEO of Apple. He's from Alabama. He went to Auburn University, and he was one of 8 people being inducted into the Alabama Academy of Honor. And he gets up and gives this rip-roaring speech about how Alabama was too slow on civil rights and is now being too slow on civil rights for LGBT people. It was a terrific speech. You can find it on YouTube. Tim Cook's speech in Alabama at the Academy of Honor, and really a great thing for him to do.
Now, the only thing about Tim Cook is that he has never acknowledged openly that he's gay yet, has he?
Well, he hasn't denied it, and he's talked about as gay quite openly, and I don't know, maybe this is the closest he's gotten, but I think he's done a great thing with this. Not so great, I think, is ex-President Bill Clinton, who spoke at the HRC dinner last weekend. 3,000 people cheering on their feet. No mention of his signing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or the Defense of Marriage Act, or not doing enough when he was in office on the AIDS epidemic. You know, he gets a free pass.
Doing nothing about Colorado Amendment 2, which was huge for us.
Yeah.
Don't trust the Clintons. You know, they're
Well,
good for what they're good for, but do not trust them.
He gets up and flatters us. You've moved farther, faster than any other movement, but there's more to do. Yeah, there certainly
Hillary
is.
didn't come out in favor of same-sex marriage until 2013. They will throw us under the bus for political expediency if necessary.
Every day. Get Equal was outside complaining, which was good. GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network, has issued a new report on LGBT students in schools, finds half of them have been harassed, discriminated against, feel unsafe, are bullied by students and staff, suffer verbal and physical abuse still.
In Michigan, unfortunately, Jackson, the town of Jackson, will not become the 34th city in Michigan to pass a gay rights ordinance. It's been tabled indefinitely.
Because the city attorney, this is one of my favorite horrible stories, says that it would violate state law, and there are cases to prove that. And when asked, really, what cases? She says, oh, I don't know. Unbelievable. And we recommend to you this weekend in Front Royal, Virginia on Saturday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. the first Celebrate Diversity Festival. Going to be lots of people, lots of booths, lots of great stuff going on from all sorts of people. And we also commend the New York City Fire Department, which is promoting the presence within its ranks of a transgender firefighter, Brooke Guinan. We have a picture of her. They were supportive of her transitioning. The only problem with the New York City Fire Department is that Brooke is one of 41 women out of 10,200 firefighters.
She's a third-generation firefighter and the only transgender firefighter.
And thank you to New York City Council Speaker Melissa Mark-Viverito, who put out a statement saying marriage, she's originally from Puerto Rico, she says marriage should be a focus of the upcoming Puerto Rican conference, Somos el Futuro.
And we have to bring you some sad news in the death of Stephen Moore, who was the president of the National Gay Pilots Association. Executive director of the National Gay Pilots Association. He died in a plane crash at Boulder Municipal Airport.
Private plane, his plane that he loved to fly. Terrible story, 35 years old. All right, well, I think we ought to skip some of this and move on to international news because we're running out of time. Human Rights Watch has come out with yet another report on how LGBT people are discriminated against in Jamaica. Not Safe at Home is the name of the report. They detail 56 cases of violence, government and private discrimination. By the way, the Jamaica Gleaner, which is the main newspaper there, editorialized in favor of same-sex marriage.
That's surprising.
Yep.
In Mexico City, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission executive director and others are meeting for the annual meeting of, isn't it ILGA? ILGA. Excuse me, ILGA.
500 people from around the world.
International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association, which somehow all boils down to ILGA. So they're having their meeting right now. Surprising
news out of Uganda. 2 court cases. In one, a gay man who was attacked by a mob, arrested, charged with carnal knowledge against the order of nature. I'm sorry, it was a gay man and his transgender girlfriend. The case was dismissed because the prosecution kept delaying, produced no witnesses. They say they would have preferred a trial because it might have settled some questions, but dismissed. And another case against a gay activist, Sam Ganafa, head of Spectrum Uganda, also dismissed, again because the prosecution just kept delaying.
In cookie crazy Kazakhstan, a bunch of students won $188,000 because they were subjected to a poster of a 19th century Kazakh composer kissing Russian poet Alexander Pushkin. This was so damaging to them that the court awarded them $188,000.
This was a poster made by an agency to advertise a gay bar. It was actually in a competition. It wasn't even used in advertising. And the two images were used because the streets were named after them at the intersection where the bar was. And and in connection with this, a right-wing leader in Kazakhstan says that there should be blood tests to identify gay people. And you should also look for them because they wear colored pants.
You know, we can laugh about it, but unfortunately for the advertising agency that put this ad out, they may be ruined.
It's got to be appealable. A court in Singapore has upheld their sodomy law against gay people. They say if you want the law changed, you have to go to the legislature.
70,000 people attended Taiwan's LGBT Pride Parade.
Yeah.
And this is on the eve of them considering marriage equality. So it's a good thing.
They're still working on that. And church leaders in Liberia say Ebola is a punishment from God for sodomy. And those are Catholic and Protestant church leaders, which of course leads to violence against gay people.
Exactly.
All right. Let's just quickly do some entertainment news. Well, I have Andy's reviews of The Real Thing and The Last Ship, both of which he liked, but if you get our, there's The Real Thing and The Last Ship. If you get our newsletter, write to andyhum@aol.com. If you don't, you want to be on the list, his reviews will be published there. And we are running out of time. We
did want to talk a little bit about Dear White People and the reaction that occurred when a bunch of students or football players from Morehouse College, which is a historically black college, all male, went to see the movie and got raucous because it had gay stuff. You guys mentioned how there is a very central gay character in it.
Well, because you mentioned it, and then I saw the movie, and I saw, yes, there is a central gay character.
But this caused a lot of controversy and sort of spotlighted how Morehouse needs to address its diversity issues and really make some changes in how they bring their students along.
Well, it's a shame because it's sort of the peer pressure of masculinity in that situation, and they all egg each other on to this kind of reaction. And it's not just an historically black college. That's where we saw it play out in this case, but I think it's across the board, and I think there's less of it than there used to be, but still far too much, and it's got to be addressed. People have got to stop thinking of masculinity as being anti-gay or anti-female, or, you know, we had the golf executive who was fired because he referred to another golfer as a little girl for complaining. I could go on and on about that. I'm glad he was fired. But we have run out of time. Thank you, Chris, for sitting in for Andy.
My
Andy
pleasure,
expects to be back next week. He is recovering from his hernia surgery.
And happy Halloween!
Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.